Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rochelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to episode 51 of How to Live Slow. It is so great to have you here again today. I hope you're really well. And if this is the first time we're meeting, I'm Rochelle. So today we're talking about the perfect mother myth and how perfectionism really takes away from our experience of motherhood. And I have the perfect guest to talk about this. I've got Louise East, and she is a certified mindset and life coach and a fellow matrescence facilitator. So she works with overwhelmed mums who are ready to release guilt and perfectionism and live a calmer, more intentional life. So she is one of us, if you know what I mean. She's all about slow living as well. So she helps mums, rewrite beliefs that create those perfectionistic thinking and behaviours and uncover what's really true for you with strength and grace. So it's such a pleasure to chat with Louise, and I know that you're going to get a lot out of this, particularly if you really struggle with perfect mother myth and all the things you feel you should be doing with motherhood. So it's going to be a great episode. So it's a really good time to tell you that if you missed out on doing the Martyr to Matriarch workshop series, I have opened up a wait list so that you can join that and get notified of when the next round is going live. And it's actually only a few short weeks away. There was a lot of requests to run it again, and this time it'll be at night, so a little bit more mum friendly. So if that is you and you wanted to join the next round of the Martyr to Matriarch method, then please head over to my website and join the wait list. It's just howtoliveslow.com/method. Okay, enjoy the show. Let's meet Louise. Thanks so much for joining me today, Louise. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and more to mum.
Okay, so I was a very happy corporate workaholic, perfectionist, control freak for many, many years. And essentially I've been on this long journey of undoing and transformation since then. And, when I was much younger, those things worked really well for me. And the first piece of the undoing was when my first marriage fell apart. And that's a really significant part of my story because it was the first time in my life that I realized I couldn't control all the things and I couldn't make my life turn out the way that I wanted to. That perfection that I had in my head that I thought I was working towards was all of a sudden unattainable or, just out of reach. I started then on this big lesson of, how to deal with not feeling good enough and not living up to those standards that I had in my mind. And I started to really practice tuning into what I wanted out of life and how I felt instead of what everybody else thought I should want and feel. After that, I met my husband, I moved interstate, and I became a stepmom to 3 teenagers, all because I tuned into the fact that it felt good for me. It was not what I expected at all and not the path that anyone expected me to take. In hindsight, it was right. Amazing. After we got married, we had our little boy, so he's 6 now. And of course, perfectionism reared its head in motherhood. And like many mothers here, I overthought things and, got really caught up in all the expectations of mothers and criticized myself and felt like I wasn't doing well enough in some areas. And I think especially if you have perfectionistic tendencies already, then motherhood can exacerbate these greatly. So the last few years, I have just been working through that, learning to release the perfectionism, and I can really see the difference in who I am today. Much calmer, more confident in my choices and more aligned than ever. And in terms of my work, the part of that relates to more to mum is that I stopped pursuing this corporate career that I thought I was meant to have. And when my son was 18 months old, I decided I didn't want to go back to my job. I'd already extended my leave and I decided to work for myself. How did More to Mum come about? Well, it was because I took the skills that I had from my corporate life and I decided to help the people who I could see were struggling so much around me every day, which was mothers. And mothers, the particular mothers that I love to work with, do struggle with perfectionistic tendencies. So this is where I am now. A lot of my clients typically feel very overwhelmed and they have a lot of guilt and inadequacy, and they just want to be calmer and happier and be more intentional with their lives.
What a beautiful journey. It's such an interesting thing. I've got so many of my friends, I've got those younger kids at the moment, and so many of them are going back to work, and lots of clients as well. Yeah, looking at going back to work or just figuring out what that looks like. And it's a real moment. It's a real I don't know what I really want anymore. And even when they do go back to work, it's like, oh, I've changed so much. This doesn't fit with me. The the dynamics changed. I can't make this work. And then there's the guilt and everything.
And the feeling that it's my fault.
Yeah.
Why can't I do this anymore?
Yeah.
Which is not really our fault.
Yeah, exactly. And I can see why that, if you've got perfectionist tendencies, why that would feel like such a much bigger, it takes up so much brain capacity and worry and anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as well, the perfect mother myth, there is, what is that? Because I think there's perfection, and then there's that next level when you have kids, and you if you're a perfectionist, you then have this story about what a perfect mother is, and you're constantly comparing yourself to that, right?
Absolutely. I think it's pretty important to just say here, you can feel the pressure of the perfect mum myth without having natural tendency for perfectionism across your life.
Yeah.
So that is so, and I'll get into this a little bit, but that is so pervasive in our society that everyone feels it to some degree. But I think what you've just said is right. When you have those perfectionistic tendencies, it severely amplifies the pressure.
Yes.
And I think you even want to meet it even more, because perfectionism is always told, well, we were raised to believe that was an asset for many of us.
Yeah.
So we really own that. It's part of our identity that we're proud of in many cases.
Yeah, that's true. I think as well, just thinking about it, if you didn't identify as a perfectionist prior to having kids, I can see that mum guilt would would go through the roof if you're not a perfectionist, but you've got this standard of what you think you should be doing, and you can't meet that either. So it's probably getting us from both angles. But
absolutely. I think it does get everyone to some degree. It's just different how you come to it and different how you experience it. But perfectionism itself can be generated in a high stress situation that has really high standards. If you didn't struggle with it before, there's nothing saying you couldn't struggle with it once you hit motherhood, because it is a high stress situation with incredibly high standards.
Yeah, that's so true. So what is the perfect mother myth, just to clarify for people?
Yes, great. The perfect mother myth is a socially constructed view of motherhood. It's formed over time, and it's these ideas or rules, some people like to think of it as, that determines what we should be doing, that great word, should, if we're going to be deemed a good mother. So some people call it the good mother. I like to call it the perfect mother. Whatever resonates with you is fine. The key to know is that it can look different in different cultures. Depending on where listeners are listening from, they might want to reflect on what it looks like in their own location. But largely in modern Western society, it's about intensive mothering. I'll give you some examples. The perfect mum is the primary carer for her children 24/7. She's self-sacrificing, meaning she always puts her children's needs before her own. She tunes into experts for advice, where actually many of us have been taught not to trust our intuition as children. She gives endless amounts of time, energy, and finances towards the raising of her children, and she's completely satisfied and fulfilled by motherhood. She doesn't need anything else. She's calm and composed, and she cares for every part of her children's needs. So she's responsible for their physical, emotional, social, psychological, developmental, mental, and spiritual needs. She looks good. She stays fit. She attends to her husband. She bounces back to her pre-pregnancy weight. She keeps a clean and tidy house. She breastfeeds her children. She disciplines them with a mere look. Can you just feel the pressure as you hear these things?
Such a myth.
I know. She's feeding them highly nutritious meals from scratch. She's playing with them. She's enrolling them in all the right activities. And interestingly, in modern Western society now, she's even expected to contribute financially to the household, which is completely at odds with being the primary carer 24/7. So that doesn't work. Yeah. We're expected to give our whole selves to motherhood, but then we're also expected to be more than a mum. So you can kind of see why this is just unattainable. I mean, I feel exhausted when I go through a list like that.
Yeah, exactly. It just makes me feel really tired and really sad to think that so many of us are carrying around that idea of what we should be doing each day.
Yeah. And what I
And
find real, oh, sorry, go.
oh no, yeah, go on, you go.
I was just going to say, what I feel is really interesting is that if you were to pull out any one of those things, so many people would say, yes, that is what a good mum does. But when you put them all together, you can see that it is completely unattainable. And you go, no wonder that mothers are resentful, exhausted, angry, depleted, anxious, overwhelmed and unhappy. It's no wonder because
Yeah.
we're going to fail against this standard.
Yeah, that's right. In my sort of program, we call that martyrdom, which I mean,
Yes.
that's because you do start to get resentful when you've got that sort of expectation. But it's not just from us, right? The message comes from other places.
Yeah, the message is coming from everywhere around us, and it's so subtle that we don't even realize we're absorbing it. All the way from back in childhood, when we watched our mothers raise us, we went to our friends' houses and watched how their mothers interacted. We saw the ads on TV with the beautifully dressed mothers caring for their children. It's coming from all the, even stories that we read, to our kids, or as adults, anything, that articles that we're reading, social media posts we're seeing, all sorts of things. Even the way the medical system and the education system work has bias in it that are related to this perfect mother myth. So we're not consciously going, oh, that's what a mother should be. I'm not doing it like that, where I'm walking around and researching based on what I see, but it's subconsciously going in there. So by the time we're mothers, we already have this expectation of how we're going to do that role. And I mean, I think nearly every mother I talk to says, oh yeah, they're not going to let their children watch screens, and they're not going to do this, and they're not going to do that. And that is actually all based on that perfect mother myth. And then we get to motherhood and we go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that.
Yeah. These children with their own ideas about their own personalities and what they think that they need. And
yes. And I think what's really hard about it is that those ideals, a lot of those things are coming from the past. And in today's society, the pressures are different. Mothers are mostly raising their children alone. And when I say alone, I don't mean completely isolated, although some are, but we don't have the support structures in place that we need to be able to even meet some of those things really well.
Yeah. Yeah. The village that they talk about, or that we talk about, like the support and the neighborhood old lady up the street and so-and-so's teenage daughter that can babysit and all of those things. Is that what you mean? Like that
Yeah,
village?
that's right. And just the expectation that people will pitch in and that you could leave your kids with someone really briefly to go and do something. Or, I hear a lot of conversations around the fact that people ask if they can help, but it's not the help that's really needed. So do we really understand? I mean, I think a lot of us as mothers now know what mothers need, but what about others? There is an expectation in society that mothers will cope. And if they're not, when will they get over how they're feeling and just step up? Or we tend to get blamed. So we've got all the responsibility and all the blame and not the support that we need. So it's really interesting. And I always say to the mothers that I work with, it's no wonder that you feel like this. It's not your fault. And it's no wonder that you're blaming yourself, because you're probably feeling the blame from everybody else. There's a lot of judgment, as we all know.
Yeah, that's right. I was actually talking to someone recently about the fact that a lot of us, because we don't have that sort of village lifestyle anymore with lots of different inputs and different adults and people around, a lot of us, the first time that we're involved with small children is when we have our own kids, because, unless we were the oldest sibling and our parents happened to have kids, when we were a little bit older or something, quite often, so there's also that we were saying, we regret sort of our attitudes towards the women at work before we had kids that had kids, and then needing to go for school pickup and just having that assumption that they're slacking off or whatever. Yeah, it's a kind of related issue, but it's sort of lack of understanding of what it actually means and all the pressures that mothers from the wider society, what it's like to be a mum.
Yeah.
And I find the support that I get from other mums are Preppy started school this year, and the people that messaged me were mothers who'd had kids that went through there and knew that what I would be feeling, to say good luck today. But it's harder to understand those feelings when either you don't have kids or they're younger. So it's like that sort of, yeah.
Mm.
Um,
I think that's a really good example of the self-sacrificing, because not only do we sacrifice ourselves, but think about all the preparation that happens for kids going to school, just as an example. It's
yeah,
all focused on the child. How's
yeah,
your child going to feel? How are you going to pack their lunchbox? How are you going to do this for them? How are you going to do that for them? How will you get them through the day? But who talks to mothers about the fact that your child going to school, whether it's your first one, your second one, or your last one, is a massive change emotionally and to your day-to-day life for mothers? There's no talk about that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're so right. It's amazing. And even if you do get that talk, it's usually related to how the other siblings will go.
Yeah, it's not about you still.
Yeah,
Or it's a reflection of the perfect mother myth, which is, well, now you've got all this free time. So are you going back to work? What are you going to
exactly.
be doing? You can't be lazing around at home all day. You know,
Mm.
it's that sort of thing. Or join the school committee, or do this, do that.
Yeah,
So there's a real undervaluing of the mother's experience and her contribution in society, which is really sad.
it is really sad. Yeah. I don't even know. And the thing is, like, what we can really do about it, it's so pervasive, isn't it? Like, apart from changing the narratives ourselves and telling different stories, but yeah, it's sort of like an unsolvable problem, isn't it?
I don't like
Yeah.
to think of it as unsolvable, but it does
Mm.
feel very daunting, I think, for a lot of women.
Yeah.
But I actually think changing individual stories, changing the narrative, us talking about it more is really important. And then there are obviously people who are more inclined to seek change at an organizational level and be more in that activist role. And that's needed as well. So I think it kind of needs change everywhere.
And everybody's can do their little bit in their way that they feel that they can contribute to that.
Yeah,
Mm.
well, I think if you just consider your personal friendships with other mums,
Yeah.
if the I mean, I don't know what your personal friendships are like, but if the conversation wasn't already one that acknowledged all these pressures, and if you shifted the conversation in your personal friendship group to be very real and vulnerable and talk about the fact that these things are weighing heavily on mothers, how much would that change your world? That could be transformational for your small circle of friends, which then amplifies out as they feel brave to talk about other people. You know, I do think that can be really impactful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on that, probably also talking to your partner about it. I think when we sort of the imaginary delegation and that mental load that we talk about a lot around here, sharing that and also asking for help and communicating how you're struggling rather than just feeling that resentment. On the mental load, particularly on the mental load of perfection, you've said that perfect mother myth is a mental load. It's carrying that emotional, takes up all your bandwidth, trying to meet those expectations. And I think your quote was the mental load of perfection prevents you from having peace, which I love. I just think that that's just so good. So what
Thank you.
can we do to get out of that perfectionist or that perfect mother myth and sort of and what's the alternative?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can just talk about a little bit about what we do when we're stuck in it. Is that all right? Just to
Yeah.
make it clearer about the alternative. I think there's a lot of behaviors that we engage in that we don't realize we don't need to engage in when we're trying to live up to this myth. So if you can bring awareness to the things that you get stuck in when you feel like you have to measure up to these unattainable expectations, that's a really good first step. So things like being really caught up in busyness, because when you are trying to be the perfect person, perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect woman, which is all kind of related
Yes.
for us as mothers, then there's never enough. You never get there because it's unattainable. So you're always taking on more, doing more, saying yes to things that you really want to say no to because you feel like you can't let anyone down. It would hurt someone's feelings. That makes you not agreeable and not helpful and not self-sacrificing. So you end up with a really full plate. And then typically if you struggle with perfectionism, you add to that, you tend to overwork things. So you might, you don't want to just pack a sandwich for your kids' lunch. You want to cut all the vegetables into flower shapes and, make something different every day. And look, some people love doing that. This looks different for everyone and how it plays out. But for some people, they do it because they feel they should, not because they want to. And the other thing is we spend a lot of time worrying about what would happen if we don't get things right. And that takes up a lot of energy and a lot of mental space. So we think about all the things we've done wrong a lot. We second guess ourselves. We overthink things. We over research things.
I
All
can relate
because,
to a lot of
of
that.
course, so many people can. And
Yeah.
it's really coming from this place of, I don't want to be not good enough. I just don't want to be not good enough. I don't want to be judged. I don't want someone to think I'm failing. The stakes feel so high in motherhood because who doesn't want the best for their child?
Mm.
Who wants to, I hear this all the time, ruin their child or create later problems for them? That's what we're trying to avoid. So that those stakes are really high. The other things we do, one which you touched on, is we don't ask for help because that would be showing that we are not coping. So we can't ask for help. We can't talk about how hard it is. So we just continue to feel bad about it, which takes up a lot of emotional energy. And we don't rest because there's never an end. When do you rest? If you're self-sacrificing, you can only rest when everyone else's needs are met. And let's face it, in motherhood, that never happens.
So true. Yeah, that's right.
I don't think it matters if you have one child or 10. In one way or another, there's always something that needs to be done. So these are some of the things that we get really stuck in. Oh, and the other thing is comparing ourselves. A lot of mental space taken up by comparing ourselves to others. Because the thing with perfectionism or this perfect mother myth is we're always focused on the external standard and we're always looking for validation against other people to see how we're going, rather than tuning in to see how we're going against our own standards. That the myth disconnects us from what we think is important.
Oh, there's that internal validation versus external, or internal fulfillment versus external validation. And quite often it's not even anyone specific, right? It's this external, like just perfect mother myth. It's this person that doesn't actually exist.
I know. And this person is a result of decades worth of women. It's an accumulation of women over the decades. So it's not even one person from history. It's melding together in some superhero form a mother that does not exist. That's the supermum myth, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Same
right.
sort of thing. Yes. So in terms of moving past it, let me talk about that. So I think there are three things that you can really focus on to move past perfectionism and the perfect mother myth. And the first, just as an overall, I think understanding that the myth is there and delving into what you subconsciously believe a good mother should do and be is a really great place to start. So this is something I do with most of my clients, if not all of them, nearly all of them. We sit down and we talk about, well, what do you believe makes a good mother or a perfect mother? And then it's about, so this is the thought process, right? So we've got to first challenge our thoughts. What are my thoughts around being a good mother? Then when you have them, I find writing them down really helpful. When you have them written down, then you can challenge each one. Is this what I really believe? Have I inherited this one from somewhere else? And which of these are important to me? So maybe some are important to you. Maybe you like doing them. Maybe you just need to alter them a little bit. Which ones will you keep in some form? And which ones completely don't feel right to you? That's how we challenge the thought. I'll give you an example. Actually, only last night I was talking to one of my clients. We had a coaching session and she's trying to complete a project, a personal project. And she was telling me that it feels really heavy because it has to be perfect. It's hard. So she's procrastinating, which is a classic perfectionistic move, procrastinating. Yeah. So I asked her what perfect meant in relation to this project. This is getting clear on your expectations for yourself. And she told me, but I could tell when she was explaining what perfect looked like that it felt really heavy. So I said to her, is that what you really want? And she said, oh no, I think that's too much. It's overdoing it. So interesting that we can feel so compelled to achieve something that we don't even really believe is necessary.
Interesting. Such a good point. Yeah. Yes.
But we don't even stop to check in because we're too busy striving and trying to get there and feeling bad when we don't and feeling guilty and criticizing ourselves that we don't take the moment to say, why am I even striving for this?
Because it doesn't really benefit our kids anyway. The striving creates that resentment that we've already talked about. But even if you were able to meet that perfect mother myth, I can't imagine that that's a good thing for your kids because you're not creating any capacity for them to do what they want to do and play and learn and explore and make mistakes of their own. Yeah. And to experience hard things, right?
Absolutely. And I think they also, life is not going to be perfect for them.
Exactly.
So they need a role model in how to deal with imperfections. And when we can't accept our own imperfections, they're going to struggle to to accept theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and put themselves against, which is exactly what you don't want. Your
Exactly.
kids putting themselves against some immeasurable, like in unachievable measure of what they should be achieving, and then developing their own perfectionist
That's
qualities.
right. Exactly. So I think
So
that's a really
fascinating.
good lens, actually, is to think, would I wish this on my child?
Yeah,
Why do I wish it on myself? Or maybe I'm not aware of it yet, but maybe now that I am aware and I realize I don't want this for myself.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not kind and it's not the way to live. So to go back to that example for a moment then, when
yeah,
I asked her next, which is the same thing you can do with being a good mother, when I asked her next, well, what does success look like to you? She came up with some much more realistic things. So that's a really key, just challenging. It's a really key process, challenging those thoughts around what do I believe is a good mother. And then the thing that a lot of my clients get disappointed with is, why do those thoughts persist after I've had this realization? But
yeah,
I'm still feeling like I need to be perfect, and I say, well, I'm really sorry, I don't have a magic wand to make those things go away. And the reason that happens is because you have embedded those thought processes, not you purposely, but in your brain. Those thought processes have occurred so many times. They are well-worn paths.
yeah,
And our brain likes well-worn paths because it consumes less brain energy to execute them.
yes.
So it takes a while of going back to your new standard and reminding yourself before it starts to actually come automatically.
Good
That's
advice.
normal. Yeah, it's normal, because I feel like people think they're failing again when they can't change their thoughts immediately.
Yes. Why am I not doing this perfectly?
Yeah. So exactly, I'm not changing my imperfect thoughts perfectly. The analogy I like to give is, the thought is there, and if you think of driving a car, those thoughts were previously driving the car for you.
Yeah.
You're not going to let them be the driver anymore. They can sit in the car with you, but you can sit them in the back seat.
Yeah, brilliant. It's
So
a
you
good way of
can,
thinking of it.
yeah, you hear them, they pop up, they're automatic, and you go, oh, hey there, perfectionistic thought. I hear you, but you're not the driver anymore.
Yeah. Just letting them, you just have to accept that those thoughts are so ingrained that they'll always be around.
Well, for a long while anyway. I
Yeah.
do think, and personally have experienced, that the thoughts come up less and they're not
Yeah.
as loud, but it just takes time. It's not going to happen in a week or in 2 weeks. It
Yeah.
takes time and practice, and that's okay.
It's good.
That's real.
Yeah, it's real. That's right. That's the word I
It's
was
funny,
looking for.
actually, when you say we're aiming for imperfection, because that's true in a sense. And in another sense, it's like, well, we are imperfect. So we're really just aiming to be how we are.
Yes. Yeah,
And
so
not
true.
trying to be something else. And I think, that's the perspective. If you feel that you're already good enough, because this is what we're saying, you don't have to be any different, any better than you are, then really you're just coming back to yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a lot of what I talk about slow living, is that it's so important for mums, particularly in the early years, to slow down, to develop that mother's intuition and that connection with your baby. And that is what hopefully overrides in some, I'm starting to see more and more, the more conversations I have with people like you, realizing that will be the thing that sort of protects you against those perfectionistic tendencies, to just know that you know what your baby needs and to trust that. And hopefully take that on into the later years as well. Who knows? But
it certainly can't hurt. It's going to be definitely an asset for you.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, with the rest as well, like it's so important for mums to rest, to develop that connection.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that the research shows really clearly now is that to have that really secure attachment, or that well-developed attachment with children, you need to be a well-resourced parent. So that means you actually need to invest in your own well-being and rest, because when you're depleted, you can't build that connection as well as you would probably hope to.
So fascinating. So you've given us a couple of really great practical tips already, especially moving past perfectionism and the perfect mother myth. Have you got any other tips for us?
Sorry, because I said 3. I've only done 1.
I know. I was like, I can't.
We went off on a little tangent. It's all important though.
Yeah.
So yes, number 1 was to rewrite those thoughts around what makes a good mother. Number 2 is to look at the behaviors. So when you're trying to break out of perfectionism, you need to change your thoughts and behaviors. When you do only one, it may not be sustainable. So in terms of behaviors, I love this one. This is taking little steps to be imperfect on purpose. and get comfortable with the discomfort.
Yes, good. Okay.
Some people like to think of it as rule breaking, and if that appeals to you, go with that. Some people like to think of it as rebelling. Again, if that makes you feel excited, go with it. Whatever works. So maybe you don't do something that you feel you should. Maybe you limit the amount of time that you spend on something that you would normally overwork. Maybe you give a real answer when somebody says to you, "How are you going?" You tell them that you're having a really hard day. Maybe you allow yourself to be 15 minutes late to something. And skip in with glee.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of little examples that might not be so terrible. Maybe you don't change your child's top when they get food on it and you let them wear it to the shopping centre.
Yes. Yep.
Or you ask for some help with something that isn't too massive. Maybe you're not asking for a whole day of childcare. Maybe you're just asking for some help with something small. So exposure to your fears, which the fear is not being good enough, feeling like you're failing because you need help or you can't do things perfectly, little by little helps us realize that even though we are imperfect, hang on, I'm still okay. My friends and family still love me. The world hasn't ended, which I'm saying in jest, but actually that's when you are perfectionistic, the fear around those things is really huge.
Yeah.
Very seriously huge. We worry that we're not lovable, not worthy, not acceptable. People will reject us. And I'm not saying here that you should have no standards, because some people feel that it's either or, and perfectionistic people tend to be very black or white. So it's like have perfect or failure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's not like that. It's just, you can still have high standards, but high doesn't have to be unattainable.
I'm instantly thinking maybe not tidying up when you've got friends coming over, just leaving the toys there.
Yes. Maybe it's even if it's really hard. I had a client who actually did this exact same thing and messaged me about it. She was so excited. She just didn't clean up a bookshelf. She was already on a cleaning rampage, and then she remembered all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm doing this and I don't need to do it. And she only had this bookshelf left, and she went, I'm just going to leave that. And it was fine, and for her, that was a really great breakthrough.
Yeah, amazing. So it is really actually those simple things of being a rebel and not making the kids' beds or whatever that can be really freeing by the sounds of it.
Yes, I think for people who really struggle with this, little by little is good, because otherwise you get so scared of what could happen. If you go too big too quickly, then we avoid it. And then we feel we failed at not being perfectionistic. It's just this vicious cycle. So I always love to say to people, set yourself up for success, small steps, because what you want to get used to feeling is successful. And then you're building that trust in yourself that you actually can do it. The last one, or did you have a question first?
No, I was going to say, so that's the second one.
That's the second one. The last one, the last one is kindness towards yourself. So the first one was change your thinking around the good mother myth. The second one is change the perfectionistic behaviors. And the third one is show kindness towards yourself. What I mean here is actively look for opportunities to validate the things that you're doing well for yourself rather than getting it from someone else. It can be so small. Actively look for opportunities where you have tuned into what you need and honored that, where you listen to your own voice over someone else's. It's like what I do with my son now. Something I've learned to do over the last few months is if he brings me a piece of artwork and he says, oh, Mummy, do you like it? And, ordinarily I would say, oh, I love it. It's beautiful. I love how it's so colorful or whatever. And I've learned to say, well, I'm really interested in how you feel about it. Do you like it? Because he then is measuring himself against his own internal measure, not against what I think.
Wow. Okay. I have heard people say, to say that to them, but I never really thought about it as being so that you teach them to care what they think about themselves. I just sort of thought, I don't know. I didn't really make that connection. So thank you for that, because that's really powerful. Yeah, great.
Well, I guess I'm actively working to not instill perfectionistic tendencies in my son because I've walked this path. So these are one of the things that I've learned can help, because you want to really tune them into themselves and their own standards. They're not doing what we're doing, what I'm doing, what I used to do a lot. Savor your achievements. So when you're being kind to yourself, allow yourself to really celebrate what you've done well. We are so busy doing and moving on to the next thing and striving harder that we don't take time to celebrate.
I can see sort of like what we were talking about at the very start about people not understanding what it means to be a mother and the pressure that mothers are under. from the point of view of celebrating ourselves, because we're not necessarily going to get it from any other people anyway, because it is underappreciated or misunderstood from society level. So to acknowledge and be proud of ourselves for what we have done for our families I can see that's just such a powerful way of doing it, to almost give ourselves a pat on the back and say, I'm going to sit down and have a cup of tea. I deserve it.
Absolutely.
Simple as that, right?
Yes. Or even just telling a friend about it, telling another mum, hey, I achieved something really great today. It was little, but I feel so proud about it.
Yeah.
And then that kind of gives others permission to do that too.
Yeah. Like, I handled this tantrum this way and I got the outcome I was looking for. Woohoo!
Yes. Even if something was still hurled across the room, you might have still been able to stay relatively calm. So you can, even though the whole thing didn't turn out the way you wanted, you can still celebrate the fact that you didn't lose it.
Yes, which is worth celebrating. It is hard to do.
Yes, I know that one well.
Yeah. Awesome. 3 really, really great tips. Thank you. Did you have more to say on that one? Sorry,
no,
I have a bad habit of taking the conversation completely off track.
Totally fine. No, that's what I was going to share with you.
Okay, cool. And as well, the other thing that I wanted to ask you was, it's so often easier, like especially if you've listened now to all of this, you'll probably go away and start to notice it in your friends. Like, I can see how this friend's doing that, or she's really perfectionist about that. I think she needs to go easier on herself here. Or you can identify it in other people probably more than you can yourself, particularly if you're avoiding that navel gazing and can't quite bring yourself to see how this might be playing out for you. You might be able to see it in other people. How can you sort of support your friends through it, verbalize the support, and then probably if you're being verbal with your support for your friends, hopefully it starts to trigger something in yourself for yourself. Anyway, long question, but how can you support your friends?
Okay, I love this question. This is such a lovely one to think about. Yeah. I think what's comfortable here is going to be different for everyone and will probably depend on where your friendships are at, what sort of conversations you have already. So you need to tailor this one. But I think getting uncomfortable is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are 3 really great ways that you can help your friends and support your friends. The first one is all about you, really. It's to focus on being authentic and vulnerable yourself. Someone's got to be the first one willing to stop self-silencing, even if it's little by little. So if you can let go of who you think you should be and be willing to let them see who you really are, how your day is really going, what you're really struggling with just a little bit, that encourages, and it's almost like it gives permission to other people to do the same, because they're scared of being judged. So if you're willing to be vulnerable yourself, then they might feel like you won't judge them. The other thing is to just start opening some conversations around these sort of things. Could be very casual, where you felt judged, where someone has judged you in terms of the perfect mother myth. Maybe you just open a conversation where you talk about, oh, somebody said this to me and I actually don't really believe that that's right for me in motherhood. Just start to verbalize, you said before, verbalize some of these things that you might be thinking after listening to this, but perhaps you haven't spoken to your friends about. It doesn't have to be an in-depth conversation and you don't have to interrogate them about whether they believe it or not, but just the fact that you're raising it over time, it just makes it easier for people to start. And they might just be listening and not going to say anything, but they might go, oh my gosh, I had that same experience. Or I wish I was brave enough to say, oh, I'm not going to do that. And then the last one is kindness again, but just be kind to your friends and encourage them. So when I said validate you before, now validate them. So look for ways that you can validate them for being their true self, and you can encourage them and tell them how beautiful that is and how strong that is, rather than praising them for maybe the things that the perfect mother myth is expecting us to do, but maybe praising them for being really messy. Life is messy, and for coping with that messiness of life and for getting through that tantrum, even though it still happened and damage happened, but getting through it and, managing and still connecting with their child afterwards or repairing. Encourage them for those things.
Yeah, I love that. Such good advice. Because it can be really solving the problem or giving them answers, but just being supportive and saying, supportive things and saying what you might feel it would be great if you could hear those things towards you. So just say those things and And
that's a great way to look at it. What do I wish someone would say to me in this moment where I feel like I'm failing? What would be encouraging? Those are the things you can say to your friends.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. So have you got any final words of wisdom for us before we say goodbye?
I thought I might share one of my favourite quotes at the moment. It's a quote from Glennon Doyle. I don't know if anyone has read her book Untamed, which I love. It's so good.
So good.
Yes. So this quote is, "The only thing that was ever wrong with me was my belief that there was something wrong with me."
Oh, yes.
I just love that so much. Our beliefs create our reality, and the perfect mother myth and perfectionism, whether you have both or one or whatever, they have led us to believe that there's something wrong with us. And so we just keep that, our brain then looks for evidence of that, and it keeps reinforcing itself. And our brain is actually discounting and ignoring the evidence to the contrary. Yeah. So I can tell you, without even knowing all the mamas listening here, that there is nothing wrong with you. This isn't true. And if you're ready and if you want to, you actually can choose not to believe it anymore.
Really good advice. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Absolutely loved our chat today. I feel like I could keep talking, but I know that we've got to keep this under an hour.
And we have.
Yeah, amazing. Well done, us. I have to say thank you. Yeah, just amazing. Where can we find you online? I'll leave all the links to everything in the show notes, but can you just tell us where we can find you if people want to know more?
Sure. So all my information is on my website, which is www.moretomum, more to mum, to is TO, .com.au. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram under More to Mum.
Amazing.
So very easy. And if anybody's looking for a beautiful community of mamas to come and learn beside, I do run a free Facebook group as well, which is called There's More to Mum.
I think I might have to join it myself.
Oh, yes, please. It's a beautiful group. It's so supportive, and it is really focused on mothers and, just releasing some of that pressure in life and helping them feel happier and calmer and be really intentional around how they create the life they want.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rochelle. I've loved being here and chatting to you.
That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.